Hi friends, Herman from the Nail Hub, back again for another episode of Nail Business Fundamentals. So far, the last couple episodes, we've discussed things like the pyramid for success. We discussed, how mindset is the most important aspect of everything that we're going to be learning here in this series. And I gave you a couple of different examples of mindset and some that you could implement, that you can adopt, that are going to increase the likelihood of you being successful in your endeavors. So next we have planning. We mentioned that most people live in the top two tiers. They're worried about tools, they're worried about the gear and the equipment that they use, and they focus a lot on their technical skills. All of them good things, right? But just with those two alone, without the previous two, you don't have a very good odds of succeeding. So we're going to be doing the opposite. We're going to be living in the bottom two planks, mindset and planning. So today we want to talk about planning. And before we get there, there is a saying that a goal without a plan is but a wish, right? And it's, sounds cliche, but it's cliche for a reason, because it's true, right? And so what we want to do is want to make sure that the goals that we set for ourselves, that they're good goals, but there's such a thing as bad goals. We need to nail down really good goals. And then once we have good goals, then we can start putting a plan together. So we're going to get started first with goals. How do we identify good goals? What makes up a good goal? Well, good goal needs to be relevant. It needs to be something that's relevant to what it is that you're actually trying to achieve, right? So if I want my business to be profitable, then I'm not going to be mixing in goals, that have to do with my personal life, like, finishing a marathon or something like that, right? So we understand that we have to keep these things separate. They have to be, these goals have to be relevant to what it is that we're trying to achieve. Next is they need to be specific. We can't have very broad goals out there, because we want to, in order if we're going to stay or keep ourselves accountable, we need to be as specific as possible, and it's actually going to help us kind of stay on track with what we're trying to achieve. So, for instance, if I just say at the end of this year, I want my business to be profitable. It's not the same thing as saying at the end of 2023, I want my business to post at least $50,000 in net profit, right? So a lot more specific. It gives us something to shoot for, and on top of that, we're going to be able to measure that and compare that, all those things. We're going to talk a little bit more about that here in a second. So, relevant, specific, and actionable. What does actionable mean? It means that you can actually do it, that it's something that is within your control, that you can actually start doing today if you wanted to, and start working towards that goal. So the opposite would be something that creating or having a goal that depends on someone else doing something, right? So that would make a lot of sense, because then that goal would just be kind of out there until someone else does something, right? So it needs to be something that is actionable, that you can actually get started immediately if you needed to, also depending on timeline. But you understand that the concept, whatever, something that you can get started on, that you can do. And next is realistic. Sometimes we set ourselves up for failure because we get a little bit too ambitious in our goals, or we, shoot way too high. The reality is that we want to make sure that the goals that we set for ourselves are realistic. All right, we don't want to overshoot. We don't want to overpromise, and it's really important that for our own motivation, and so that we don't lose momentum, and that we maintain a high level of morale, that our goals are realistic. All right, very important. But what's even most important out of all of this is you need to write down your goals. All right, various studies have shown that those who write down their goals have like 50% higher chance of actually achieving them, right? And that's because they probably, if they're already taking the time to write them down and they're committed enough to do that, they're probably also committed enough to create a plan around them. So there is some correlation there. All right, so once we have good goals, then we need to start putting them in putting a plan around it to bring them to fruition. So what makes a good plan? Well, a good plan has to have a timeline, and so we can choose between short, mid, or long term. And in our industry, my rule of thumb is a short-term goal or short-term plan would be something that we can get done within 3 months, inside of 3 months, right? Midterm would be 3 months to a year, and then long term would be anything that's a year or more in the future. And so that's going to depend on what that goal is, what the plan is, what you're trying to accomplish. And I think that's pretty reasonable for our industry. That obviously varies by industry. You're going to have different timelines and different time horizons. So you determine what your time frame is. Next is we're going to identify any stakeholders. A lot of you might be on your own, might be, you would consider yourself a lone wolf, and it might be someone that says, hey, I work on my own, I am a booth renter, and I do my own thing, I manage my own business, my own calendar, my own schedules, my own customers, just everything I'm on my own. And that's totally fine, that is common, but I guarantee you that you do have some stakeholders. Stakeholders are anybody who is affected by what you do. So by the success or lack of success of your business. That's a stakeholder. So someone like your children, your spouse, someone that would be affected by by the success of your business or lack thereof. So everybody has some sort of stakeholders, and identifying those stakeholders is important because it's important to bring them in and talk to them about what it is that you're trying to achieve, because it also helps keep us accountable. If we can bring someone in and say, hey, this is what I'm doing, this is my plan, and I want to meet with you, once a week or once a month or whatever it is, and I want to show you my deliverables and show you, what I've done, what I've accomplished, that kind of stuff. It really helps keep us on track, keep us accountable, right? And then some of us might have stakeholders that are a little bit more obvious, right? If you have a business partner, if that's someone that's actually part owner of your existing business, then obviously they're a stakeholder. If you do have a business like a salon and you have multiple owners and you have employees and all that kind of stuff, then they're going to be stakeholders. They're going to be impacted by whatever plans that you're going to be putting in place. So it's important that you talk to all stakeholders, you identify who they are, that everybody is on the same page, that everybody is bought into whatever the plan is, and that you all share in it. And sometimes that's sharing in accountability and saying, hey, we're going to split up all these tasks, and you're going to be responsible for this, and you're going to be responsible for that. I'm going to be responsible for this, and everything be out on the table. Very important that we do that, okay? We don't want to just be in an echo chamber and pretend that we are in a vacuum and that nobody is going to be affected by what we do. It's actually just the opposite. As much as you might feel that you're alone, you probably aren't, and there's probably a few people that will be impacted by what you do. All right, so moving on. We need to measure progress. We can't change something that we don't measure, and we can't measure something that we don't track. So one way or the other, you need to identify ways of measuring things having to do with this plan. Very simple, very straightforward if we're talking about finances, because it's numbers. So if we're going to be looking at sales data, if we're going to be looking at customer service, if we're going to be looking at gross profit, at expenses, something like that, it's very easy to track numbers that way because we can usually pull them up in Excel or in whatever system that we use. And so that's pretty obvious. But even in things that don't have anything to do with finance, we need to find different ways to measure things so that we know how we're doing along the way, because that brings us to our next area here, which is having milestones. This also has to do with our timeline. So we need to have check-in periods where we check in on the plan, we check in on ourselves, we check in with our stakeholders, and everybody can see how we're doing. Are we on track? Are we on schedule? Are we behind schedule? Do we need to make any changes? All of that stuff is very important, and that's why every time that we have these check-in sessions, then we have to be able to have data. We have to have those measurements or those key, what we call KPIs in the corporate world. You'll hear that a lot. Key performance indicators, and these are just numbers that tell a story. How are we doing? Are we doing well? Are we doing poorly? What's going on? The let the numbers tell a story. So you're going to need to figure out in which way you can measure these things. But checking in and having these milestones is very important. Obviously, the longer term the plan is, the more milestones that you're going to have, the more check-in sessions that you're going to have. If you have a very short-term goal, you might not have very many, if any, if it's something that you can get done relatively quickly. All right, but for the most part, we usually have some milestones and some check-in periods. The way that I like to do this, especially for longer-term plans, is to break up the goals into smaller goals. And so if I know that I want to, at the end of the year, post $100,000 worth of profit, then that means that I'm going to break that down into 4, right? So by the end of the first quarter, I should be already at $25,000 worth of profit. So then I'm going to run those numbers and see where I am, right? Am I almost there? Am I beating it? Am I right on it? And so, my overall goal is $100,000 of profit, but my short-term goal for that 3-month period for that first quarter is going to be $25,000. For the second quarter, it's going to be $50,000, and then so on and so forth, right? So, just so you understand kind of what we're trying to achieve here. And if you have all of these things, it's going to make up a good plan. And again, just like our goals, write it down. Don't think that just having these things living up in your head are going to be enough. We need to have this stuff on paper, on your Kindle or your laptop or whatever it is. Write these things down. They're going to significantly improve the chances of you succeeding. All right. So those are just very, very basic things that you want to do surrounding goals and plan. All right. So going forward, the topics that we're going to discuss, those are going to become goals, things that you're going to want to achieve. So you're going to have to come up with your plans as to put all of these things into play. So if we say, hey, you need to research your market and understand your market better, and we're going to teach you how to do some of those things, then you're going to need to be, hey, I need to know my market. I need to do these things that I learned from Liz or from Herman. You're going to have to come up with a plan as to how to implement that, right? Or if it's your finances and learning about some basics of accounting so that you're very, very, very familiar with every aspect of your business and just the financial health of your business, then that's going to be a goal, and you're going to have to develop a plan around it in order to achieve that. All right, so that's basically how all of this is going to work. So we have a lot of stuff coming up in the comment section. Start sharing some of your goals with us. We want to see what stage of your business you're at, so that we can start thinking about different topics and different things to put in this series for you. So we're seeing a lot of great comments and a lot of you guys helping us out with a lot of different things. So we really appreciate it. So keep them coming. Keep the comments. Share your goals with us. Share your plans. If you have any tips and tricks that you want to share with us and with the rest of the audience, go ahead. But we have a lot more coming up, so stay tuned. See you later.